Alright, hello everyone, and thank you for tuning in once again to the Black Box Podcast. BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. Today we're discussing a new mystery that we've never mentioned on this channel before. We are going back to 1995 to examine the case of Jennifer Fergate, a woman who was found dead in an Oslo hotel room number 2805. Once again, this is back from 1995. That's really gone as one of Scandinavia's largest unsolved mysteries, for the reason that Jennifer Fergate was not her real name, someone who committed suicide under an alias. I shouldn't say committed suicide, because that's one of the larger pieces. We don't quite know exactly what was going on with her death. Now, I was just watching some of the uploads about this. I was following this case back in during the summertime, and it's now November, so I decided to just revisit some of the information. There's a documentary that was put out in Norwegian, available at vg.no, and I'll hopefully post a link to that. I also saw the Dark Curiosity special about this, and that documentary that I mentioned comes with a kind of explanation of the crime scene. They kind of have sort of a model, and you can follow along and learn about the different pieces of the crime scene. Now, there were some things that were brought to my attention by Dark Curiosities, and they were stating that this woman, Jennifer Fergate, was roughly 159 centimeters tall. When she checked into the hotel, she wrote down two names, Jennifer Fergate and Louis Fergate. I hope I pronounced that correctly, because, like when I hear people say that, I'm pretty sure they said Louis Fergate. And we also have one witness account that says that they saw this woman, Jennifer Fergate, with a taller gentleman. We don't really have much info on him, and that's just a sighting. There's not too much detail associated with that. But let's get into what happened with this woman's death before we can talk about anything associated with, who, what, when, where, and why. What we can say is the body of Jennifer Fergate was found in her hotel room, number 2805, which, as I interpret, is on the 28th floor. Now, what we can say is that she was found to have died from a single gunshot wound to the very center of her forehead. Like in many things that are traditionally ruled a suicide, they are, of course, done to the temple or to the throat and in the mouth. But no, the barrel of the gun was placed directly against her forehead, and if she did indeed commit suicide, she pulled the trigger with her thumb. Very, very peculiar. There was also no residue found on her hand, no blood spatter found on her hand. And this documentary that I mentioned, they use that as their largest piece of evidence to really try and insinuate that Jennifer Fergate was murdered. Because they're like, how could she have pulled the trigger on this gunshot that would have killed her to the head and have no residue and no blood spatter on her hand? Well, we'll discuss some of that in a minute. One of the other things, though, is that the room was double locked from the inside, which is like, two locks on the door, double locked from the inside. I assume that they mean that is some sort of deadbolt, that, it was not only locked, but it was also deadbolted from the inside, meaning that they were like, how could anybody have, murdered her and then exited, but been able to double lock it from the inside? And then if we're going to be talking about the 28th floor, no one could have really climbed across any sort of window. There were no balconies and things of that nature. They couldn't have escaped that way. So it's a very perplexing issue. Furthermore, we have something that Dark Curiosities mentioned, that Jennifer had ordered a meal that was bratwurst and potato salad. I mean, that's very famous, and you can actually see a model of that in this documentary that I mentioned. They even pay attention to that. They also say that, she only ate part of it, and the meal looks interrupted. But when the autopsy did kind of an interesting find on that, they were saying that not only did she eat only part of the meal, but the food was cold for 24 hours. She didn't eat it for 24 hours until after... what they're trying to say is she ordered the food and it was just sitting there for 24 hours before she started to eat. So that's kind of another peculiarity associated with that. They also really try to say that they believe that somehow some altercation could have kicked off while Jennifer was eating, because they said that the meal looked interrupted. Once again, we'll discuss a little bit of that. And there's also a very interesting thing to note, that all the labels from Jennifer's clothing were removed, and the alias the employer that she said she worked with, and the address that she had provided from Belgium all turned out to be just purely fictitious. These places just didn't exist, as well as her name was not actually Jennifer Fergate. We also heard that she was speaking in English without any sort of accent, with a native accent, as well as speaking German with a native accent. There was a bag that was found near the bed that contained ammunition for the pistol that was used in the death of Jennifer Fergate, and there was also one shot that had been fired into a pillow. Okay, so what on earth happened to this woman in the Oslo Plaza Hotel back in 1995? What on earth is going on here? Well, on this channel, mostly I do not really hold back my own personal theories, and I like to just put those out straightforward. Hopefully, people are somewhat familiar with the case, so we can just get right into the theories. When it comes to the death of Jennifer Fergate, I believe that she was from one of the German-speaking countries, most likely Germany, possibly Austria or Switzerland, but I don't really expect that. I mean, once they hear that she's speaking English and German at a very high level, I really get the feeling that she was coming from Germany. Not to mention, she ordered bratwurst and potato salad. Need we say more? Okay. Now, this is one of those things where I believe that this was indeed a suicide. A lot of people are looking at some more of the scandalous aspects of the case, such as that Jennifer Fergate was a spy, she was a high-end escort, she was, associated with some sort of criminal ring. I want to just kind of eliminate a lot of those things because I feel they're too assumptive. What I think is a little bit more suggestive of the evidence that we have is I really want to just know more about blood spatter and gun residue, because I've talked about the case of Jonathan Cruz on this channel, where they believe that he may have caused an accidental death by firing a gun that he thought was unloaded, and that would have killed him, but there was no gunpowder residue on his hand. With the case of Jennifer Fergate, I think that is just something that happened. I believe that the way she was holding the pistol, she would have held this up to her forehead. Her thumb would have been on the trigger. I believe that she pulled the trigger and the recoil of the gun, happened so fast that she didn't really obtain blood spatter the way they kind of had anticipated in the documentary. Moreover, sometimes gunpowder residue just isn't found on the hand. I admit it's horribly peculiar, but the room was double locked from the inside. We're talking like it had to have been manually locked from the inside. That tells me that really, unless, it was a locksmith that did this, I don't necessarily think that is indicative of a murder. I believe that this was a suicide, just with some very peculiar blood evidence. But as we follow lots of true crime cases, this comes up so frequently. They're like, how would this person have been able to shoot themselves without blood spatter or gunpowder residue on their hand? I think that it's actually a lot more common than people believe. In regards to Jennifer ordering food and letting it sit there for 24 hours before she would have eaten it, I don't think that that's unreasonable. A lot of people order things for the future. I mean, I've done things of that nature, especially when I I've even ordered food in a hotel, had the room service sent to my room, which was a big mistake because horribly expensive, and they even messed the order up. But I digress. So I've ordered food, and I've eaten half of it, and then I just kind of left the half for breakfast because you're traveling and you don't want to go out and it's just easier to do it that way. I don't really think that that's a super abnormal thing to order room service and just leave the food in the room, even for 24 hours. You might not think that's the most hygienic and sanitary thing, but I've done it before myself. And furthermore, I really think that we see a lot of the characteristics associated with the case of Jennifer Fergate in other true crime cases. Lyle Stevick, Peter Bergman, individuals who are really trying to just remove their identity and get rid of them. They're just trying to erase any sort of existence that they had with the world, and they don't want to be found. With the case of Lyle Stevick, we really saw very, very deliberate attempts to, even the whole concept of checking in under an alias, like Peter Bergman, Lyle Stevick, Jennifer Fergate, is really good now that, every hotel that I've been to in the last 15, 16 years has checked my ID, whether it's been a passport or a driver's license, I mean, yes, obviously that's a very, very good thing to do. Especially, that they could have been bringing in a foreign national in the case of Jennifer Fergate. We're just, because when you're not checking any sort of ID, it's like, well, this is how these things happen. People are just checking in under an alias and committing suicide. Lyle Stevick committed suicide by hanging in his room, as well as Peter Bergman, I believe he was found dead on a beach nearby. But Jennifer Fergate was found dead in her hotel room. Now, what exactly happened, though? Was this thing something associated with some sort of criminal activity, or did this woman just sort of want to commit suicide in a way that would be uninterrupted? Well, what a lot of people are interpreting is, we mentioned that there was one shot that was fired from the gun into a pillow, I believe, and the mattress. What a lot of people interpret that to be is that was a test shot to make sure that the gun was functional, and I definitely would have to agree with that. That just, I think, is the most plausible interpretation of the evidence. Well, why would Jennifer Fergate commit suicide in this hotel? Well, she did check in with two names, right? I mean, if I have heard his name correctly, Louis Fergate and Jennifer Fergate. That to me, as this is a purely interpretive statement, but that to me is indicative that, she was obviously feeling some emotional duress because of a certain individual. I think that this is some sort of kind of backlash over a romantic encounter gone wrong. We're talking about feeling kind of heartache, being heartbroken, depression associated with heartache and being heartbroken, and that leads Jennifer Fergate to this suicidal pathway. I'm not exactly sure how she obtained the firearm or the massive amount of ammunition in the case that wasn't used. What it really looks like is somebody dumped out a box of ammunition into that particular bag/briefcase that was found near the bed. Okay, I do believe, though, that Jennifer loaded the gun. I believe that she fired the gun herself, and I think it's much more common than people actually are recognizing that there was a low amount of blood spatter on the hand, or there was no blood spatter on the hand, really. But we have to remember that Jennifer wasn't holding the gun in any sort of traditional way. She wasn't pulling the trigger with her index finger. The barrel of the gun was pointed directly toward her forehead, and she would have had to have squeezed the trigger with her thumb. I'm not sure if that would have any sort of impact on powder residue or blood spatter. That's really not my area, but I believe that that could be a factor. Overall, though, I would really just have to insist that powder residue on the hand, as well as blood spatter, is probably not as prevalent as people are giving it credit for. Like, I don't think that that is necessarily, as big of an issue as people are making it out to be, because on true crime cases and documentaries and all of these things, anytime this comes up, there's always one line on Dateline or something where they would say, blood spatter and gunpowder residue aren't always transferred to the hand during a suicide gunshot to the head. They always have one sentence in there about that. I think that this is very possible. It's just that that hasn't really taken place. It hasn't really been, publicized that much because people want to focus on the more scandalous aspects of the case. But furthermore, who is Jennifer Fergate? Well, once I hear that, she is speaking English and German without any sort of accent, and she's ordering bratwurst and potato salad, that really gives me the feeling that she did come from, indeed, Germany. Oh, perhaps somewhere associated North Germany, Berlin. It's kind of guesswork at that point, but it would at least give some sort of starting point. And I do have to insist, though, that I believe that this is something associated with somebody feeling a large sense of grief over a particular romantic individual, writing down those two names, which apparently there was no evidence that there was a Louis Fergate in the room at all, with the exception of I believe there is one report that someone said they heard two voices in the room. However, even if there was a man in the room, even if there was a man in the room, how would he have deadbolted the door from the inside? How would he have double-locked the door from the inside? That really tells me that this was indeed a suicide. It's just that the forensics are kind of, a little bit abnormal, and the gunpowder residue and the blood spatter are abnormal. I don't think there's anything bizarre about Jennifer's eating habits, and furthermore, I don't believe that there is anything bizarre about finding any sort of prints in the room that would be abnormal or out of place or not matching to Jennifer. a lot of the stuff they're talking about, those items could be touched by a wide variety of people. Absolutely. I mean, it's a hotel room, and even on items like Jennifer's bag or clothing, of course there could be fingerprints all up and down. The only question is, I mean, that doesn't implicate anybody in a murder. Those would just be possible leads to identify her. Well, I think it's very interesting that she wrote down that she came from Belgium, and it's possible that maybe she was indeed from Belgium, but I really get the feeling that she did indeed come from Germany. I mean, we don't necessarily know that 100%, but perhaps, I really think, though, that if she did write down that she came from Belgium, that was probably to throw a false lead. I think there might be a larger psychological phenomenon that goes on with certain people, such as they want to just completely eradicate their identity. Peter Bergman was a very, very clear case of that. The man who's walking around in Ireland, I believe it was, just tearing up his documents, destroying all of his evidence. He carried it out in a little purple bag and would destroy the evidence, and then he would come back and then do the same thing every single day until he died, as well as Lyle Stevick erasing all traces of his identity. I think that this is just something that is a larger psychological phenomenon. As people prepare for suicide, they just want to erase all connections to the past. They don't want to be found. They don't want any family members to know. They don't want to be recognized by anybody. The remains of Jennifer Fergate have since been exhumed so the police could study them a little bit more. Overall, though, I would have to insist that I believe that Jennifer was feeling a lot of heartache and distress over a romantic encounter, perhaps, some type of heartache, either perhaps a breakup went horribly wrong, or that just feeling a sense of loss and grief for a romantic individual, someone that she had been romantically involved with. That's why there are 2 names checked in on the hotel. That's why that she even went to the level of pulling out almost all the labels of her clothes. But one label that did remain was actually a German brand. So I really do have to insist. I believe she came from Germany. My gut feeling tells me that she came from Berlin, but I don't have any evidence to support that. Just like trying to understand the thing. Okay, so I don't think there's anything abnormal about her eating habits. I don't think there's anything abnormal about having a briefcase full of ammunition. That means someone poured out the box of ammo into the briefcase. She loads the gun, fires a test shot into the pillow in the mattress to make sure the gun works, places the gun against the very center of her forehead, puts her thumb on the trigger, and then the gun is fired. The doors have been double locked from the inside. No one could have entered through the windows. This really leads me to believe that this was a German woman who committed suicide because she was experiencing a very large sense of grief over an issue of heartbreak and heartache. I don't necessarily know if we're ever going to be able to positively identify who Jennifer Fergate really was, but what I can say is that I would hope that she is identified at some point. I would definitely think that perhaps we could look at, possibly some of the labels on her clothing. Maybe that could ever identify anything associated with purchases. Maybe the police could look at, like when this item maybe potentially was purchased. Not to mention the ammunition for the gun. That could also be something. Maybe there are some numbers or associations with that. But I really do have to insist, I do believe this was a suicide and not a murder. What do you think? And if you have anything to say at all about what I've put forward, please let me know.